Well, hello, everybody. This is Mark Turi, and welcome to my Thursday evening live this week, which is a little abnormal from our regular schedule because yesterday happened to be the first of the yearly Jewish high holidays, which is Rosh Hashanah, which, of course, for those who know, is the Jewish New Year. And yesterday I decided to take the day off. Probably should have rescheduled it. I when I scheduled this this particular one on the Wednesday, I knew it was Rosh Hashanah, and I wanted to actually reschedule it to the day before on Tuesday, but didn't get around to it until late. When I woke up Wednesday, I thought, "Oh gosh, I forgot to do that." So we are just one day later now on Thursday. And today, of course, we're going to be talking about the difference between science and scientism. We're going to be talking a lot about philosophy, some history, etc. But of course, before we get into that, I want everyone here to know to say thank you very much for being here. If you're watching on the replay and you haven't liked the video, please do so. If you haven't subscribed yet to my channel, also please do so. In addition to this, um, for those who are and will be watching live, of course, you can comment live. You can make comments after the fact of any questions, concerns, challenges, anything you wish. I'll do my best to answer as best as I can. And again, just please like the video, subscribe to my channel. I would really, again, like this channel to grow. As I've said before, I'm doing okay as far as subscriptions and so forth. It's pretty steady, I would say. I haven't really gained or lost uh, subscribers in the past like month or two, but again, I would like to this to grow. So we can kind of have a bit of a bigger audience and people can kind of come on and contribute and so forth. But I'm also very absolutely happy with the people who are here. I have my regulars, of course, that are all come in and out. So just thank you to them and thank you to everyone who's watching this. I very much appreciate it. Before we get into, oh, hello, there we go. Oh, hi there, Mischief Manage. Good to see you on here. Thank you so much. I know that you are a mod, I think, with Marilyn, correct, and Aaron as well, because I see you quite a bit. So thank you so much for being here. I'm just very happy to see you. And you always say hello when I'm in. I think either Aaron's or Marilyn's chat, but I want to say either one of those two. If I'm wrong, please correct me. But thank you so much. This is the first time I've seen you here, so I appreciate you coming on and saying hello. And of course, one of our absolute regulars here tonight, Irish Mart. It's always good to see you, Irish Mart. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all your support and for being on these lives. I just really just love and enjoy, these lives because I get to sort of check in with the regulars. And Irish Mart is one of our uh, wholly exalted regulars, as I like to say. So I appreciate it. Maryland, okay, forgive me. All right. So one of Maryland's mods. Yes, that's now my memory is correcting itself. So I appreciate that. I hope to be on with Marilyn. I'm hoping like, soon, because she helped me reach 50 subscribers when I was on her channel. I guess it was now what, a month ago or something when I restarted my channel and I got up to my 50 subscribers. So she's been great. And I appeared, I think, a week or two ago on her live, and when she's live, I like to just say hello. So that was really helpful. She's great, and always want to like talking to her. Always want to talk more with her. Thank you, Irish Mart. Yeah, I hope it's an interesting topic. I'll just get into my thoughts and so forth. But before I do that, of course, the topic today um, is again science versus scientism. We're looking at the process of science. We're looking at, you know, things like the study of science and so forth. And then we'll look at scientism, which takes science a little bit out of the range of the physical sciences and more into philosophy. However, I definitely, think that there's, a good distinction, and I just want to talk about my thoughts. That's all it really is, and give some notes and things that I've observed over the years with different groups and perspectives. I have taken both science and philosophy courses, as well as social science courses, history, humanities courses at university. So just again, things I've thought about and learned along the way. And so yeah, so I'm very interested in that. 82 subscribers. Yes, thank you, which I think is good. Again, I would like to grow it a little bit more, but I do think it's really great. And again, we do have a really, really great group of regulars that come on. I usually have a stream on Wednesdays and Saturdays around 3 p.m. Eastern. I will give a note now, and then I'll remind you guys later. Also, next Wednesday, I won't be able to have a stream on Wednesday, so I'm going to reschedule it for Tuesday. However, after that, we're going to go back to the regular schedule this week because of Rosh Hashanah, next week just because I have a prior engagement, as they like to say. And then the week after, we go back to Wednesday and Saturday. And the last, like I would say, couple weeks, especially week or two, I've done a lot of really interesting things that have a lot of good feedback. So I've been very appreciative to the people who um, was here last time, last weekend. So it's been a little while now since Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 5 days. I did a PowerPoint on the differences in Jewish movements, which could be called denominations, as well as the ethnic makeup and ethnic groups. That was really, really nice. I really thank those who came and watched it had good, a review of that, which is really great. And then, of course, I've done stuff on like revolutions and sort of this big kind of philosophical stuff. And I think I'm sort of getting into the swing of being able to do like a talk, in a sense, a non PowerPoint talk about just things that I've observed, like we're doing tonight, and then try to do a PowerPoint. And again, I'll get into more of my sort of future schedule at the end of this talk. I do want to say hello to someone new I don't think I've seen here before. CO Biff, science provides proof of geocentric universe. Scientism mandates heliocentric lies. Yeah, it's a good comment, I have to say. Yeah, absolutely. I will get into some of those, those philosophical ideas and so forth and break them down as we usually like to do here. So I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the engagement. I appreciate, again, everyone who's here who supports me as I'm getting my channel started. All the comments, both in the chat as well as afterwards. Just thank you so much. And just before I get on to the topic, I always like to give a little bit of updates. So uh, for those who have been with me here or who have watched at least the last couple weeks of my streams in September, a couple weeks ago, we had some flooding around a river, Danube River, and that's dissipated, thankfully. Although past couple days there's been a lot of rain. It's been I don't call it cold, but of course people do around here. Today and the past couple days have been anywhere from the high of around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. So I want to say that's at least high 40s into maybe the high 50s, low 60s. It's really hard for me. I used to live in America, so I used to be more on the conversion. But I think 10 degrees Celsius has got to be somewhere in the 50s at least. And then the lows are usually, anywhere from 5 to 10 Celsius. So that's got to at least be in the high 40s for those in America, our American friends. But so far, not too bad. It's crisp, it's fall, it's or autumn, whichever you prefer. And it's nice, it's beautiful. Again, raining though today, but not tons of rain, just more drizzling and kind of light rain. So You know, I usually don't like going out in the rain, but it wasn't that bad. Took an umbrella, did some errands, all that kind of stuff. And really, just continuing what I've been doing before. That's it. Nothing too exciting, nothing too much. When there is something of more excitement, I'll be I'll be sharing it with you all. But so far, just a nice, quiet sort of days inside, or going to various places, doing errands and so forth around the city. And the one thing I love about where I live is we have really great public transportation. So everything is connected by underground subway. We have trams, trolley buses, regular buses, and so forth. And we even have ferries, which I don't think are in operation right now. But I really, I just really, really happy that, the city's back to normal. The flooding has dissipated, and everything again. Life goes on, and the river cruises, as I mentioned last time, are back. That's always a good sign. So when I was on the on the metro, I think 2 days ago, I heard people speaking French. It's actually yesterday, excuse me. I was on the metro. I heard people speaking French. So that's always a good sign when you hear other European languages, French, German, Danish, Dutch, especially Spanish or Italian. It means that the river cruises are back, especially German French, because they usually fly or take the train to like southwest or southeastern Germany, and then take these river cruises all the way, sometimes even to the end of the Danube River, which flows into the Black Sea, or they go to Belgrade or something, all the way from southeastern Germany, from Bavaria. So it's nice. 55 degrees in Washington State. I've not been to Washington State yet. I would love to go. I hear Seattle is really nice. Olympia, Tacoma, pretty beautiful place. I have been to Vancouver, but only the airport and a little, that's all. But I do know it's kind of a rainy sort of maritime climate. So I do know in Seattle, at least, it rains quite a bit, but I'm sure it's gorgeous from what I've seen. A tip I got last week from a Swedish yen is Fahrenheit to Celsius, subtract 30, then divide by 2. So then multiply by 2 and add 30. Okay, I like that. Although I'm bad at math, so I only got half of that. I live in Budapest, Hungary, and I'm very happy to be here. I really enjoy it, and I've been here for 3 years. So yeah, so it's always nice because in Europe, of course, and I'm from Canada originally. So growing up in Canada, we of course we use the metric system, and we do use Celsius. But I lived in Los Angeles for 3 years, and I went to junior college there. And so I had it more like, I mean, I can still broadly make, Fahrenheit to Celsius and vice versa sort of temperature uh, uh, translations or calculations, but I'm always off a little bit. But regardless, again, everything so far so good. I do want to plug, of course, on Saturday in 2 days, as I mentioned, because today was kind of an odd week, that I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation, which is taken from, as some of my PowerPoints have been in the past, which is taken from a presentation I did 2 years ago in a class. And we presented it to a lecture, to a class at my university. As I also, people know, I'm doing my master's degree right now and doing my thesis, taking a year to do my thesis. So it's called Memories of State Socialism in Yugoslavia. And I'm going to start on sort of the broad history of how Yugoslavia started after the First World War, and some of the background to that creation of what was then called the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. And then we're going to take it more, introduce you to the most notorious leader of Yugoslavia, whose name was Tito. And then at the end of it, you get to see a picture of myself when I was a kid, because my family did go to Yugoslavia when in the very late 80s, actually 89, when I was just a small boy. I'm 41 now, so I was about 6 at the time. And just looking at the city that we were in, which was Skopje in North Macedonia, sort of how that changed. And then, you know what? I actually am thinking about it now. I went to Skopje in July of 2023, so just last year. So maybe I'll mix in some photos now that I think about it for the modern state of Skopje and sort of how it's changed. If for any reason I don't get to that, I'll just make comments. But I think I could probably just muster up another slide or two on the modern state of the Republic of North Macedonia. So that will be on Saturday. I'll do a poll, and then, as I mentioned, we will come back on Tuesday because I have a prior engagement on Wednesday. And I'll make a poll. As I said, I'll make a poll probably soon about that. And then after that, the following Saturday, so that would be, please bear with me for a second here. On the 12th of October, I'm going to do the first part of a two-part PowerPoint. So on the 12th and on the 17th will be on the state of what's called of Germany just after World War One ended, and actually even a little bit before World War One ended. It was called the German Revolution and the German Civil War. So we're going to look at the events from roughly the 4th of November, 1918, and then we're going to go into it's about the end of April 1919 for the first part, and then we're going to look at sort of the rise of the Third Reich between, I guess that would be around 1919 to like 1924. So I'm not going to get into like the 30s. So it's going to be just those kind of I guess you want to say the founding sort of years and what led to this German Revolution and this German Civil War, and then what led to the rise of the political conditions, the social conditions, and the economic conditions that led to the establishment of the German Workers' Party and then the National Socialist German Workers' Party. So I hope everyone enjoys that. But today we are going to talk about the difference between science and scientism, which I feel is a very interesting discussion because with everything, there are a lot of ideas, perspectives, and opinions, facts and non-facts about what is science, what science can do, and there are lots of groups that advocate for science but aren't actually science groups. They're actually, in some cases, skeptic groups or humanist groups, and those individuals tend to have a scientistic perspective. So, what does that mean? So, the first thing is, I am not an expert. I find that people who claim that they're like experts in science, whether they're historians of science or philosophers of science, do have very good perspectives, but ultimately they're not scientists. And of course, we know that, like every subject, science is extremely complicated. It's made up of many parts. But when I was an undergrad, when I took a biology class, I learned that science is a tool that human beings use to understand more about the natural world, and that depending on the science, it can we can learn more about ourselves, and we can also learn, like for example in health and medical sciences, we can learn to prolong life, help life improve, and so forth. So it's a very important and interesting study. And so that's kind of where we start, which is it just depends on the type of science. We all know biology is life science, organisms, cells, atoms, etc. Taking a bio class, I learned about neurobiology. I learned about the origins of certain cancers. I learned about neuroelasticity. We learned about a whole bunch of stuff that was really interesting. This was a human biology course. I learned a ton of great things: neuroscience, neurobiology, cancers. We learned how to read scientific studies, which I think was ultimately one of the best and most um, useful things that I learned in that class, because scientific studies themselves can be pretty dry in many respects, but I learned to really enjoy them and how to sort of, if you don't have time to read an entire study, there is something called an abstract, which summarizes what the study does. And you can go on to the websites for New England's Journal of Medicine, the National Academy of Science, the American Medical Association, etc. And you can download tons and tons of studies and just read the abstract and get into some of those things. So I really liked and enjoyed those aspects of science. Of course, chemistry is chemicals. Like, I don't really have to get into the whole thing, but a lot of people um, are interested in it. And so again, science is the study that helps us. And this is one of the basics that I think is very interesting about the pursuit of science and the study of science is that it deals with the natural world. Okay. So another thing I've talked about before is that in my biology textbook, the first thing that we learned was what is science? What is the purpose of science? And what are the limits of science? And I was really, really uh, uh, happy and very helpful in this perspective. So, most scientists today, right, are like everybody else. They can have a myriad of different beliefs when it comes to things like God or the afterlife or the paranormal or whatever. Some people will believe, some people won't, some people won't be sure. But the entire point of doing science is that there are certain things that we can observe and there's certain things that we cannot observe. And this is where it gets interesting. So I learned in this class that the limits of science is that it is not a philosophical pursuit. So that things that are metaphysical, meaning theology, spirituality, religion, or secular humanism, atheism, etc., is just not talked about in science. If a scientist happens to be religious, non religious, theistic, atheistic, agnostic, neutral, hardcore anti religion, hardcore pro religion, that's their own personal belief. And it's because, and this is the point, that I was taught that the limits of science is science cannot tell us who to vote for. Science cannot tell us what is and isn't ethical. And science cannot deal with things that are beyond the physical world. So this kind of surprised me because at the time, and this was back in, I think, in 2018, 2017, 2018, was I was uh, in groups where I was invited to speak because I'm an ex-Scientologist, as many of you know, and I was invited to speak to skeptic groups and humanist groups, and I always maintained a little bit of a distance, but I liked going to these groups. I really identified too much as a skeptic or a humanist, and that's okay if you do. I'm not here to shame anyone. It just wasn't my own, personal preference, and again, that's okay. But I like the fact that they had different discussions, and they did talk about philosophy and science and all these kinds of things, which I respected. I thought it was nice. Of course, I had a falling out with them after a few years because of some things that I saw that I didn't like, which we're going to get into in a moment. But that's just me. Okay. That's just my personal experience, right? People have different personal experiences. And so it was really interesting because these groups, I think, tend to become echo chambers. And the idea of an echo chamber is actually one of the first lives I did, which you can check out on my channel about feedback loops and echo chambers and how certain beliefs that you know cannot be quantified or cannot be falsified sort of become the norm. And I, honest to God, was hearing people say science has proved that there is no God. Science has proved that there is no afterlife. Science is atheistic. and that atheists know science and that humanism and science are like the same. And then I open up my science textbook and I'm kind of aghast. So I went to my science professor. Now he wouldn't tell me what his religious background was. I didn't care. And I said to him, um, "What do you think about this?" Well, he said, "That's not science. That's something else. That's philosophy." I got really, really interested in that. I was like, "Really?" We have people like Sam Harris who actually does believe that science tells us who to vote for. Now, I'm not going to give you my perspective on if I were an American citizen or a British subject or whatever, and I am a Canadian and Hungarian citizen. It's none of my business on who you want to vote for, especially in the US where there's an upcoming election. I have my favorite between the two candidates, but that's my personal business and I can't vote. But I'm not going to say that science has proven that I should vote for person A and not person B. Okay. Doesn't matter about my emotions, my personal experience, my philosophies, my ideology. That's not a thing that science does. But Sam Harris claims, Sam Harris also has written books that science and neuroscience in particular, and evolutionary biology, tells us how to be ethical. And again, I'm looking at my science textbook and I'm saying that that's not true. Well, the next question is, are these people scientists? Are they philosophers? Of course, you can be both, but what is it? So many, many years ago, and this is sort of full disclosure, I had heard the term scientism. I grew up not very religious, Jewish family. Some of my family had converted from Christianity to become converted from Judaism to become Christian. Some of my family were Jewish. They converted to Christian. Some of my Christian family converted to Judaism. It's weird, I know. But in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was in high school, um, we had a group of students, and some of my friends were involved in various Protestant Pentecostals and evangelical movements. As probably, if you grew up in the United States, I'm sure it's pretty popular to have, in high school, the group of Christian students, right? Because especially in the US. And I remember that they used to use this term, scientism. What did they mean by that? Well, we were in science class and we were learning about evolution. Of course, a lot of these individuals believed in, and probably still do, in young Earth creationism. And they believed that Darwinism or Darwinian evolution, which a lot of that has been surpassed by modern science, was scientism. And so one of the reasons I kind of almost fear, right, using the word scientism, especially to people who have grown out of a conservative Protestant or Catholic religion, is because the word scientism has been co opted and tarnished. Where if you even mention the word scientism, the people turn off because they associate scientism with a right wing, religious, creationist type of worldview. But that's not the case. Okay. Scientism is a philosophy. It was used by two philosophers. One of you guys are going to know if you've been watching my um, videos and my lives. One is F.A. Hayek, who, of course, was the author of The Road to Serfdom, Constitution for Liberty. That's all politics stuff, which I used to like. I don't anymore, full disclosure. But he would use the word scientism because he was also a social scientist. And then someone who we've talked about before, Karl Popper, who also coined the phrase pseudoscience and really defined pseudoscience, was also someone who codified in some ways that term scientism. I don't really know the precise exact etymology on how far back it really goes and who was the first person to use it and coin it. But I do know that in the modern time, meaning in the early 20th century, Hayek and Popper were the two that sort of lifted it out of whatever it was. And scientism is a very specific philosophy. And that's what it is. It's a philosophy about science and the the authority of science and the dogma of science. So, how do you know what's the difference between science and scientism? Science, science and scientism differ on this particular notion. If you've ever seen people online in real life, part of these skeptic groups or whatever, that make the claim that science either can or will eventually prove everything and solve everything. So even whether or not there's a God, whether or not there's a creator, an afterlife, like things that are metaphysical, you are not in the realm of science anymore. You're in the realm of scientism. I do want to say that there were very famous skeptics, okay, like Michael Shermer of the Skeptic Society, who has embraced this term. Michael Shermer, who's someone I've, years ago read some of his books, pretty harmless, very neutral guy. He's got a very good personality, I think. I used to read some Skeptic magazine, especially when I was kind of coming out of Scientology. So I don't really have anything against, again, everyone has the right to free speech, freedom of expression and association. He's embraced this term. He believes that science will, whether it's now or in the future, be able to prove whether or not there is or isn't a God, an afterlife, and anything else that is considered to be metaphysical. Problem is, he's not a scientist, he's a historian of science. He's a very well known historian of science. Okay, as a historian myself, I also know that the history of science is not the same as science. The philosophy of science is not the same as science, but that's okay. Sam Harris, some of these quote unquote four horsemen of new atheism, people like Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett, tend to focus on these things. And what's interesting about this is that Richard Dawkins came up with the idea of memes, right? It's a thought or an idea that implants themselves into someone's brains, and it's like a virus and it ripples through other people, right? And it's misinformation and disinformation. The problem, though, is that like there's such a massive degree of separation between science and scientism that a lot of people really, really, really believe that like science has proven that God doesn't exist. Science has proven that there is no afterlife. But that's a meme because it can't do that. So scientists can be whatever they want. There's Christians who are scientists all over the world. Um, in China, the majority of scientists and engineers are Christian. In India, the majority of scientists are Hindu. In America, there it is hard to determine because the religious affiliation of scientists have really never been studied. They only ask scientists whether or not they pray. And so some of these surveys will come up to like 50% say yes and 50% say no, or 70% say no and 30% say yes, but there's nothing concrete. So, the person who discovered the human genome was Francis Collins. He's a devout Christian who was an atheist when he first got into science. Okay. Now, I'm not saying one equals the other. In fact, there is a separation because I'm a historian. So when I'm doing history, like my beliefs, right, to try to be objective, I kind of have to, you know, kind of have to take a seat at the back of the car. You know what I mean? For a little bit. So the whole idea being that scientism goes one step further into philosophical territory. Probably in the future, I'm not sure if I'll do it next week or whatever. There are four main schools of philosophy, which of course is metaphysics, which is what is the nature of reality, epistemology, how do we know things? Then there's, of course, aesthetics, which is art and like language. And then, of course, there's ethics. How do we live an ethical life? And skepticism, especially scientific skepticism, is not a form of science. It's not biology. It's not chemistry. It's not biochemistry. It's not physics. It's not environmental sciences. It's not life sciences. It's not medicine. And then there's the social sciences, not sociology. It's not economics. It's not, you know, political science. It's not linguistics and so forth. Scientific skepticism is a form of epistemology. Therefore, right, it's philosophy. Atheism, agnosticism, monotheism, bitheism, polytheism, pantheism, panentheism, deism, etc., existentialism, right? Fatalism are forms of metaphysics. So we have to kind of like put the proper things in the proper categories before we can even speak about what, you know, to get on the right page. And so I find that when individuals like myself are coming out of groups like Scientology or other high demand control groups, a lot of people, and I don't think this is a bad thing, at least the intention, we are welcomed by those kinds of groups. We are welcomed by the groups who would believe in a scientism philosophy. They want us to share our stories. Eventually, though, they want us to toe the party line. And I was actually going to do, and I really wish I could do this with someone, maybe Marilyn will have me do it or whatever. But before Doug Scott Kramer, our friend, passed away last December, I was going to do a talk with him about the expectations that, let's call us cult recovery or destructive group recovery people, the expectations that are put upon us when we tell our stories, when we give that away to an organization, whether it's a religious or a secular organization, and how if we're not fully on board with the particular idea or philosophy, then the people, whether it's religious or not, can become very destructive, and they can be very toxic. And so it goes back to ideology. So I know also that one of the things that I think is wrong about our culture is that science is heavily politicized. So I mentioned young earth creationism. I will also mention COVID. Whatever your belief is on COVID, whether you where whatever you believe, the origin of it, the subsequent policies, the vaccines, I'm not going to get into that. But we have to understand that, you know, there was a process when something brand new came into our world. I don't know how it came into our world. I don't know what policies needed to be. And you want to have, you know, we can talk about vaccines all day. I got my vaccines. I got 3 of them vaccinated. If you didn't get it, we're not going to have the argument with you. It's over anyway. You know, COVID is kind of under control now. But it's become politicized. And, you know, I don't like that because so many things have become politicized. Religion is politicized, of course, right? Um, Politics is politicized. Social policies are politicized. Economics is politicized. But if we could just take a step back a little bit, and especially during COVID, the people who believed in the scientism became very entrenched into their beliefs because they followed what they were supposed to follow. They did what they were supposed to do. And even now, even if, and again, I'm not an expert, even if an expert, an actual scientist came back and said, you know what? maybe we did this one thing or two thing that was a little bit more conservative and alarmist than we should have done. The people who are really into their scientism dug their heels in. And so that means that if you didn't want to do what the experts said, you were no longer welcome. This is the us versus them. This is the tribal. This is the group think. And that's something that really shouldn't be, right? Because science is not a philosophy. But unfortunately, human beings screw things up. So even if scientism was true and science was somehow a process that could prove that they're, metaphysical questions, which, although it can't, let's just believe it could, it would still be politicized. It wouldn't matter. And so I find that people that put a lot of faith in science, who talk a lot about the science believes this, science says that, well, that's not really science. 90% of them don't know what science is. They're probably speaking from scientism, especially online, because you can find out what science says by going to fact-based, peer-reviewed scientific journals at universities, John Hopkins, Oxford and Cambridge, American Medical Association, Canadian Medical Association, whatever, right? The National Health Service in the UK. I mentioned the National Academy for Science and so forth. And you can just read the abstracts. You don't have to be a genius. And so one of the things that I found that frustrated me was this idea of elitism, right? That certain people in the skeptics movement, okay, self-appointed themselves as science communicators. Now, again, I do think that there's value in science communication. Who doesn't love Bill Nye? I watched it when I was a kid. It was great. Okay. Neil deGrasse Tyson, great. These are great people, but they're doing it right because they've been doing this. They have a personality. They're really good on camera, but there's so many people that are self-appointed, science communicators that are not scientists. They don't know what science is. They believe in scientism and they keep repeating talking points. So, again, if someone is actually doing science, that is a dramatic difference from someone who communicates it to you. And you don't need to be communicated or talked down to. You're an adult, and I understand that it's not easy to read a scientific journal or a scientific study. But there's always ways that you as an individual can learn from actual professionals and actual scientists. So I'm trying to avoid getting into conspiracy where we can't trust anybody because they're, under the guise of big pharma or big this or big that. That's not what I'm going into as well. I'm not saying do your own research. I'm saying that there are people out there, educators out there who are legitimate scientists who work in the scientific field as educators who will help you to be able to access like the National Health, Academy of Science, so you can go on there and you can read it and get the information. You don't need a third party who's going to talk down to you. Now, if you like Star Talk and you like Bill Nye, there's nothing wrong with that, but you don't need someone who's part of an organization that is scientism based with a blog, who's never done science in their life, telling you what is and isn't science. It doesn't work. Communication has definitely changed within the past few years, especially with COVID. Okay. Lots of misinformation came out, which led to a lot of, horrific social consequences. But to me, we need to empower individual people to be able to discern these things, that there is science, which is the process of discovering things in the natural world. Then there is scientism, which is the dogma, the philosophy, the authority that tells you what science is and that science can prove things that are beyond what science can do. There's a whole host, by the way, of books, lectures, and so forth, going from Karl Popper, but there's also lots of other people. If you're interested in the philosophy of science, there's a lot of different things that you can look at as well, because there is a limit to science. And I know that that can scare people because a lot of people believe that science and religion are two different things. Because in North America, especially in the United States, religion, which some religions will believe in things like young earth creationism, and they will be politically active. Again, they're politicizing their theology, and they will try to, and 20 years ago, which is now an old thing, they try to get dog whistle hidden creationism into science textbooks. So then that pisses off people on the other side. Okay. But that was also 20 years ago. We also have a lot of different examples that I could give with certain groups who don't, you know, take blood transfusions or might not vaccinate their children. There's a lot of stuff, but please understand a lot of it is cultural based. It's usually within the United States and trickles out to some groups in other parts of the world, but there's just something cultural, and I don't know what it is with the United States, and as someone who isn't in the United States, who isn't a US citizen, I only lived there for 3 years, I don't want to give my interpretation because it doesn't matter in the end. What matters is that even science itself is still cultural, okay? Please note and understand that scientific skeptics will say certain cultural medicines don't work. Okay, maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe they work for some people, maybe they don't work for other people. Certainly, there's a limit to that. I do think that a lot of alternative medicine doesn't work, or at least doesn't have evidence to work. But if we're looking at something that's coming from the Eastern culture, I don't know. I think it could be that the way that in America is a very westernized culture, and the science is very westernized, whereas science can be from the East. So there's an entire study right now, and I know some people might scoff at this, called decolonizing science. Because guess what? If science is just the ability to study the physical world and provide things that people need based on that, you know, the Romans had aqueducts, the Aztecs freeze-dried potatoes in the ground. People built ships. I mean, there was science for a very long time. When the scientific revolution happened, it actually changed the way that people in the West thought about knowledge. It used to be, up until the scientific revolution, that our knowledge was based on intuition. Okay. Then it changed to be empirical fact, rationalism. But that's our culture. That's how we're educated. I mentioned China, India, they do things differently over there. And that's why in other cultures and countries, it's not so weird to say that you're part of a religion and a scientist, because a lot of what we do is interpreted by our culture and our education system. After World War II, okay, most scientists were trained on the idea of a sort of scientism based thing. One good example of this is if you read people like Stephen Hawking, which had his film The Theory of Everything. He was studying cosmology, which is not a science people study, it's astrophysics, astrobiology. But even in that movie and in the book, there's a quote that says that cosmology is the perfect religion for atheists. Because after World War II, a lot of people left religion. Well, they were seeking answers, and science was going to help, and science was going to be the thing that made us better. This is how we get to Star Trek, where there's no religion. Lots of science fiction, which focuses on science and humanism, says we can just do it without religion. It's been over 50 years, 80 years. 85 years almost since the end of World War II. There's still religion. There's a religion all over the world. People think that science has disproved God. Stephen Hawking thought so. He thought that the universe itself, okay, had no creator because nature could just do it by itself, and inspired a lot of people to believe in that. But okay, it's 2024 and science itself has shifted away from being, cosmology, the religion for atheists, to being something more holistic, something more broad, and even the idea of decolonizing science, which is looking at the cultural impacts that science has had on other cultures. Because science is not a religion, it's not a dogma, it's a process. And so I know a lot of people, and I agree with this statement, that the Nazi racism and the racism of the colonial powers that prioritized and gave us eugenics and said, white people at the top, everyone else at the bottom. I agree with the current statement that that is a pseudoscience. It's bad science. It's not good science because we all have always had the human genome. We've always had DNA, which basically proves that race is not a biological construct. It's a social construct. Okay. But in the name of science, there has been a lot of subjugation, which a lot of us who may grow up in a particular culture and having a particular skin tone and, being part of a majority tends to forget. So, just like everything else, good, bad, and in the middle, okay, science, religion, faith, politics, history, society, etc., it's more holistic. So, really, that's the end point that I want to say. Looking at things more holistically. This idea that science is absolute, science tells us what to do, how to think, science has proved this and science proves that is more of a philosophical attitude, which a lot of people don't like. But if you question them, the only reason they know that, they claim to know it, is because of the education that they've had. And that education is not universal. So whether or not that proves anything, whether or not that people will say Western science is better than Eastern science. I don't. But certainly how, and this is going to be a big theme in a lot of my lives, is that how we're raised, how we're educated, especially when it comes to religion, is usually how we see the world. And we have to backtrack on some of that because I've said it once, I'll say it again. I want, if anything that I want out of people, viewing my lives and my videos, is that if you are leaving or have left a destructive group, relationship, etc., I want to help you try to make a 180 and not a 360. Because if you make a 360, you're back to where you start, which I have. So I'm not on top. You're not on the bottom. I'm not talking down to you. I'm taking accountability and I'm meeting you at the same level. I've been there. When I left Scientology, I took a 360. It took a long time to get out of, to give myself some perspective. I mentioned disassociating myself from certain groups and people. Okay. That helped me. This is a personal experience. And I don't know, and this is where I'm also going to be accountable. I can't say that I've done a 180 and I know everything, but I'm trying to do that 180. I think I'm a little bit closer to the 180 than I was certainly 10 or 15 years ago, or from when I left Scientology in 2008. I don't know if I'm there yet, right? But I think I'm a little bit closer. And so when extremist thinking and when echo chamber type thinking is simply replaced with another one, it's like someone who's addicted to alcohol and then they're addicted to cigarettes. They're still addicted. Why don't we just figure out why we're addicted why we're in pain, talk about it, and then move forward. And that's up to every individual, right? So that those are my thoughts. Okay. I see scientism mainly coming out of academia in America and the UK, also English speaking world. I'm not too sure about the non-English speaking world because of course I don't speak German. I'm learning Spanish, so I don't know. Maybe that's a thing. But it usually is because a lot of the big proponents of scientism tend to be English speakers. They tend to be, again, the four horsemen of new atheism or so on. And I also don't want to say that it has anything to do with atheism. I know there are plenty of people who are atheists who don't like the new atheism. There's a difference. One is different flavors for different people, but there's no judgment here on whether or not you whatever label you use to describe what you believe or not. Everyone's welcome here. But I will call out the extremes. I will call out some of the behavioral patterns that I saw in Scientology and after Scientology, the extremism, the echo chambers, the memes, whatever that is, and you know, try to push towards that 180. So that's just my thoughts. Okay. If you disagree with me, please, please, please let me know if I'm missing something. If I'm wrong about something, there's people with different perspectives. Everyone has the right in my chat to be respectful. So if there is someone who is deeply into that skeptic kind of humanist atheist groups, which again, you don't have to be, that's just a different idea. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I didn't learn something. Maybe you have a better explanation, etc. Okay. And there's also things that I could have talked about, like the scientific method and all this kind of stuff that I'm not as versed in. So I've kind of left it go. So maybe I am missing some details. I'm going to get to the start questions. Let me take some water in a moment here. But again, my thoughts, be respectful in the comments and so forth. Joe DeCeppo, thank you so much for being here, Joe. I've got a couple of regulars here tonight. So thank you so much. As I mentioned with the Irish Mart, you are one of my exalted chosen few. Whatever that means, probably meaningless right now, but who knows? CO Biff, omnipotent God can speed or slow at the rate of car. So they said, well, okay. That's a good comment. I like that. I found some atheists can be just as extremist as some theists. Yeah. As I said before, um, I got kicked out of a couple groups because I used to call people anti-religious fundamentalists. They're just as destructive and toxic as religious fundamentalists. So that's what I mean by a 360. And it's not everyone who's like that. I'm certainly not trying to make a broad generality, but like if you like were and grew up as a fundamentalist, fill in the blank, and you now have become a fundamentalist anti-religious, it's like that's the 360. Like, I don't think either is healthy. I think there's a middle that's healthier. And so I've seen that. Believe me, I can even get into different groups that I was in within these communities where I saw people who just so many 360s. And, my opinion is that a lot of what these groups do, some of it can be constructive, but a lot of it's just benign. And a lot of it is just based in perpetuating anger and resentment, which I just after a while got sick of. Reducing ultimatum false postage stamp is the mess. Yeah, messed. Could it be that a lot of historical immigrants to what became the United States were religious extremists? Yeah. This is the one interesting thing when we look at people like the Puritans, and I remember talking to Marilyn about this. So, Joe, you may or may not remember one of the very early Nerdy Bunches episodes we did was on like what we would call biblical or sacred text fundamentalism versus biblical or sacred text non-literalism. So the difference that like if a sacred text like the Bible says, God created the world in 6 days, rested on the seventh, it's literal. And then there's a lot of people who take it more allegorically and metaphorically, right? So there was this big difference that we talked about. The United States being settled by Puritans. I'm not 100% well versed, so please, if anyone is, you guys can let me know if I'm wrong. I think the Puritans grew out of the Church of England. I think they were like hardcore Anglicans, but in England they were like pissing people off because they were so like in their own head and zealots that they were just causing a ton of crap. And so they went actually to the Netherlands, and I actually went to the city's called Leiden, and you can go to the, Mayflower Museum where they actually bought the Mayflower from the Netherlands and then, of course, sailed, and we get the whole Jamestown, Plymouth Rock. Somebody let me know what I'm talking about here. And they were refugees, really. I mean, regardless of they were fanatics, they were also refugees. And I know the refugee kind of mentality because I grew up with refugees, which it's people who don't want to leave their own home tend to become very superstitious and very territorial. And of course, they turned on the indigenous populations quite quickly after Thanksgiving and so forth. And they became very paranoid that people were going to come to England from England, hunt them down and kill them. So they were always on alert. This is a lot of times that happens with war refugees. You're never really out of harm's way. There's actually a really, really great movie that was made in Britain called His House, which stars one of the Doctor Who guys, Matt Smith. It's about a couple that comes from Africa to England as refugees. Now there's like a supernatural element, so it's kind of considered a horror movie. Incredible, okay? But the idea is you're never really safe. And I grew up with that. Like my whole family came to Canada. Literally, my entire family came to Canada as refugees from one war or another, starting from 1903, 1912, 1930, 1956, and I've gone into it um, on my history with history, which I did. I think Joe, you were there, if I'm not mistaken, which I did with you, I guess, and Chad. Um, but like you're never really safe. So in that, I've also mentioned before too that if we look at the like a lot of Protestant churches, Quakers, Baptists, Methodists, um, so forth, they start in England. Okay. Presbyterians start in Scotland. Lots of Catholics who were not allowed to live in Protestant lands. A lot of Protestants, like the Huguenots, who were not allowed to live in Catholic lands. The Amish and the Mennonites, which came from Switzerland and Germany. Lutherans in the south of Germany, Catholics in the north of Germany, and on and on and on, jumped boat and went to the US. So again, all kind of refugees, many of them considered immigrants, of course, but a lot of refugees started that country. And again, the one thing that you have to know is that what's it been now? 20 generations? People, they don't really feel safe. So it's not like in other countries where, in Scandinavia, parts of Europe, like most families have been there a long time. Not to say that there aren't immigrants, of course there are, but it's a completely different outlook, especially on religion, because America became a really, really hotbed for religious refugees. And I mentioned also when I mentioned last Saturday, when we talked about the Jewish community and how many Ashkenazi Jews fled from the Russian Empire and the pogroms. Okay, jumped ship on Odessa or wherever they were and took like 2, 3 weeks, a month on a fourth-class vessel, eating bread and water, and then arriving at Ellis Island. My own grandfather, of course, came to Canada in 1930 from Athens on a boat because he was very left-wing. He was actually a member of the Communist Party in Romania, which, of course, he was in Varna, so he was ethnically Bulgarian. But, police were after him because he wanted to unionize the farmers. He spent, like, what, a month on a ship and got to Halifax. My father and my grandparents spent a few weeks on a ship that they took from Genoa to come to Canada from by way of Budapest. So it's hard. Like it's a really hard and complicated thing. And in America, religion has become survival. It's become community. It's become so entrenched. And then in addition to that, the First Amendment says the government's not interfering with religion because England and Germany and France and Denmark and Switzerland and Austria and Norway and Ireland and Scotland and Spain and Portugal and Russia and all these European powers, all the big empires interfered with religion. If you lived in the north of Germany, you had to be one religion. If you lived in the south, you had to be part of another one. If you lived in France, you had to be a religion. If you lived in the Netherlands, you had to be part of a religion. Depending on where you lived in Switzerland, you had to be part of a religion. And so this is also one of the things of why cracking down on Scientology and other quote unquote cults and destructive groups is so hard. Because in some countries, if a religion is actually doing something that's destructive, Canada, the UK, Denmark, Germany, so forth, they just don't put up with it. But in America, you say religion, I'm a religion. People hearken back to that idea of when the Methodists came over and when the Amish came over and so forth. And then even American religions like the Pentecostals, the Christian Scientists, the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, massive amounts of discrimination against them and their communities. And so it harkens back to that deep rooted collective consciousness. And then on top of that, since the 70s, the religious right has been very, very big on influencing public policy. And it's made a lot of the polarization in America happen. And that's a whole other discussion. But that polarization, where I'm coming from, where I live in Hungary, there used to be a whole hell of problems between the Catholics and the Protestants. Not anymore. It's all just considered Christian. Now, if you're not, okay, depends. If you're Muslim, they have a problem. If they're Jewish, they don't have a problem. Buddhists and Hindus, they don't care. But if you're Christian, either Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox, because we have some Greeks and Armenians here, nobody cares anymore. That's kind of miraculous because in Hungary, during a certain period of time, you were Catholic or you were Protestant, and people cared. They don't care anymore. So anyway, how does that all fit into this whole science and scientism? Again, it's this extremist thinking. And you always have to understand that if something is coming from a certain culture, it's filtered through that culture. So in America and a lot of different places, science is replacing religion, but that's not science, it's scientism. So that's kind of my last point. And let's see who's here. Not young Earth creationism, but it's fun deep dive into their arguments and to annoy relatives at Thanksgiving. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I've kind of went off a little bit, but I thank Joe for that comment about religious refugees and cultural kind of things. But my last point on that is just if it's scientism, it's science trying to prove metaphysical questions and everything. Science will eventually just prove everything, and that it does differ from the actual sciences, which is and always has been since people have made things and used science, whether it's medical science, engineering science, or whatever. It's been around for a very long time. And just like certain brands of Christianity, like young Earth creationism, the idea of scientism is only a couple hundred years old. It's not necessarily universal. Not everyone who's practiced science believes in the same thing, and anyone who says they speak on behalf of science, be skeptical. So, again, I want to thank everyone who's on here for me being able to share my thoughts. Again, if you think I'm wrong, please leave some respectful and constructive comments and uh, on this video because there might have been an issue or something maybe I haven't thought about. So, just tell me if I'm wrong, think I'm wrong. Great. I want to, have a civil conversation about being wrong because again, there's always perspectives and things that I don't know. In addition to that, a quick update. Again, Saturday, I will be going live at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 Pacific, 8 in the UK p.m. And I will be doing a presentation on the memories of state socialism in the former Yugoslavia, which will include a picture of myself at 6 years old. So if you want to know what I looked like when I was six, uh, come and hang out. And we'll learn a little about Yugoslavia, how it was established, and how it broke up. In addition to that, next week there will be one scheduled change. As I said, normally I do two lives a week, one on Wednesday, one on Saturday. Because it was Rosh Hashanah yesterday, I decided to do today, Thursday. But next Tuesday, I'm going to schedule my topic like this. Please go to my community tab on my YouTube page where you can vote for the next topics. I usually have two options. So I'll keep it there, just things again that I'm thinking about. And then the following Saturday, which is October the 12th and the 17th, I'm going to do a one part and a two part of the German Revolution and German Civil War from roughly November of 1918 until somewhere around 1924. And again, it'll be a first half and a second half. So I really hope that you all have liked this live. Thank you for the participation. It was great to see Pete here. It was great to see Joe. Thank you, Joe, for being on here. Irish Mart, always a pleasure. Mischief Managed, thank you. COB Biff and anyone else who has come on. In the meantime, thank you very, very much to again to everyone who supports me. Thanks to everyone who are my regulars and so on. And I just want to get to one comment from Joe, because Joe, again, is part of our exalted few, chosen exalted few. Would it be fair to say scientism is confirmation bias dressed up as science? Yes, but also dogma dressed up as science. And again, going beyond the limits of science. So the main thing is that there's the metaphysical. Science should never be interested in trying to prove or disprove metaphysical questions because it can do a very good has a very good process of learning about the natural world. So confirmation bias will be part of that, which leads us into pseudoscience. Now, that's something that I'll put on my community tab because Karl Popper talked a lot about pseudoscience. And pseudoscience is confirmation bias. If you remember back to my history, philosophy of history thing a couple of weeks ago, Karl Popper said that science disconfirms and pseudoscience confirms, science disconfirms, something like this. So yes, because pseudoscience confirms, then that would be a pseudoscience. So saying like, starting with a conclusion and then working your way back. That is definitely something that scientism would do for sure. But it's also something that doesn't have to be in that realm as well. It could be medicine, it could be with creationism, it could be whatever, right? Hypno magnet therapies. Anyway, so it's a whole big thing, and also works with history. It works with Marxism. All of history is a class struggle. Okay, what about when it isn't? No, 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 it is because here are the examples of when it is. Well, what about when it isn't? Oh, well, that's we ignore that because we're only going to confirm when it is a class struggle. And again, I'm the person who says, "Well, show me the evidence when there isn't," and they say, "No, no, no." Because it's not a part of their philosophy. And L. Ron Hubbard was very much into this. So you know what? I will I will put up a on my community tab a thing about pseudoscience that if you'd like we can do next Tuesday. So don't forget to vote. Don't forget to like my video and subscribe. Thank you everybody. Again, thank you so much for letting me do this. Thank you for being here. Please, I hope you look forward to my PowerPoint on Saturday, and then I'll be back the following Tuesday, which is on the 8th of October, right? October 8th? Is that when it is? Yes, for more. So in case I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.